Hello, and welcome to a very special webinar. We are actually launching a book written by Henri Nouwen 30 years ago, which is just being published in English today. It's called Ukraine Diary. It's drawn from Henri's writings in 1993 when he visited Ukraine, and then in 1994 when he returned. Henri had a wonderful habit of journaling the whole process of being anywhere. And out of those journals, many wonderful books have come. Perhaps you've enjoyed Genesee Diary or The Sabbatical Journey or The Road to Daybreak. Well, this is that kind of a treasure, and we're so excited about offering it to Henri's fans, those who love reading Henri Nouwen. I know you're going to treasure this book because it's timely and it's prophetic. It really looks at Ukraine under the microscope of Henri Nouwen's heart. And it is a real treasure. You're going to have an opportunity during the webinar to meet the various people that had something to do with bringing this about. I want you to meet LAURENT Nouwen. He's Henri's brother and his younger brother. And he is an amazing man. When Henri left Ukraine, he promised he was going to return. He saw needs that needed to be met. LAURENT Nouwen picked up this responsibility and chose to return. And he has had an amazing ministry to Ukraine. You're also going to meet Robert ELLSBERG. He was the publisher who actually first turned down Henri's journals, thinking, nah, it's not, I don't know if anybody'd be interested in Ukraine. That was 30 years ago. Today, it's under the microscope for all of us. And so Robert ELLSBERG will share a little bit about that history. But first, I would like you to meet Archbishop BORYS GUDZIAK. BORYS is the Metropolitan Archbishop of Philadelphia for the Ukrainian Catholic Churches of the United States. BORYS, you wrote a beautiful introduction to this book. Tell us how that came about.
Well, it's quite a story. The text itself, Henri's text, is over a quarter century old. It was lying in drawers, one might say, or in the archive. Henri came to Ukraine twice, once in 1993 in the summer, and the second time the year after in 1994. He came at the invitation of Xenia Kushpeta, who was from the L'ARCHBISHOP community in Toronto, the Daybreak community, and my invitation. We were both friends of Henri's. We had both grown, I think, under Henri's guidance. And Henri came to support the mission of the groups that we were working with. That was Faith and Light. Xenia was basically the pioneer of Faith and Light and eventually L'ARCH in Ukraine. And I was asked by the head of our church to head a commission to revive our theological school, which the Soviets had closed, and to develop that theological faculty, once it was revived, into a Catholic university. So Henri came, he visited, he wanted to get a sense of the people, a sense of the history, and also he preached retreats both years. And he's very much remembered by the people who are participants in those retreats. Many of them were young people. Today, they're leaders. Many of them continue to be members of the Faith and L'ARCH community. Some of them continue to work at the university. Others have actually died. Some of the friends in Faith and Light have passed away. And one of the accompaniers, who was a very talented young singer, he became an opera singer in Paris, and he was killed because he returned to Ukraine to defend the country against the Russian invasion. That happened already 5 years ago. So this text was kind of parked. It was considered by publishers not complete and maybe too short to be published. And 2 years ago, Henri's brother, LAURENT NOUWEN, who established the foundation in Henri's name, spurred the notion to have it published first in Ukrainian. And Mariana Karapinka, who's my communications director, translated the text into Ukrainian. Laurent, Xenia, and I wrote kind of letters to Henri 25 years after his death, describing what has changed in Ukraine. And along with these 2 short diaries, these 3 letters were published in Ukrainian. Then the idea came up to publish the English original version, especially given that Ukraine is in the news. And in this format, it's coming out with my introduction and Laurent's kind of closing words.
It has been amazing to me how prophetic it is. As I read it, I was very struck by some of the insights that Henri had about Ukraine.
Yeah.
It was just after the famous accord in 1984. And something I love about your introduction is you really bring together the history of what was happening in Ukraine then and why it was so important that you begin the university, etc. All those things are captured in your introduction.
Well, Henri was very much interested in the history. A reader will get kind of a condensed version of Ukrainian general history, the history of the Ukrainian state, the Ukrainian people, but also church life in Ukraine. We actually met, kind of planned to rendezvous in London, in England, a couple of days before Henri arrived. And then with Henri Nathan Ball, who used to be head of the Daybreak community, and I think he had a very high position in L'Arche International, we went through that history. And we really wanted to understand where he was and where we were. But as you say, he read the signs of the times in a very prophetic way. He in 1994, when Ukraine, along with Belarus and Kazakhstan, became the first and until today, the only countries to give up their nuclear arms. And Ukraine had the 3rd biggest nuclear arsenal in the world. Ukraine had more nukes than France, Great Britain, and China put together in 1994. And it gave it up because it wanted peace. But Henri was really, concerned, would Ukraine have peace? Would Russia honor the guarantee that it gave to protect Ukraine's territorial integrity and independence? And, quarter century later, we have the situation that we have, something that Henri in some ways was predicting.
I was very moved to see the pictures of you presenting this book to your president. And that was about 6 months prior to the invasion that took place February 24th, 2022. I thought it was amazing timing that this book came together at that point. Amazing. And as I read the book, I myself found myself deeply moved by, in a way, I would say the tenderness of Henri to what was happening in Ukraine then, his sense of what it was to find courage to be bold. We see the Ukraine of today with an amazing sense of awe at what's happening there, of pain, but also genuine respect for the moral leadership we see and the courage and the commitment to freedom that we see. Tell me a little bit about what you feel Henri contributed in his short stay there. I know that you were there to start a university. Tell me about that. Did Henri help in any way in that formation?
Well, he did. He accompanied me in a spiritual and pastoral way. I met Henri in January 1984. It was his first semester teaching at Harvard University after moving from Yale. He had a special arrangement with Harvard that he would teach one semester and travel the other. That was a period when he was very interested in Latin American societies and spiritual life in the Latino world. So I took Henri's course, and there were probably 300 students. It was packed. You know, people were sitting in the aisles, basically, in this amphitheater of a large classroom. And then the following year, Henri asked those who took the class the previous year not to take it again. I was a graduate student in a different school at Harvard. I was in the Arts and Science School, not the Divinity School. But at that point, Henri got use of a house. It was called the Carriage House on the campus of Harvard, where every day there was prayer that began with the morning office, a half hour of silence, and then the Eucharist with Henri's sermon. And there was probably 10 or 12 of us that came regularly. We sat on the floor. There was a little room in this small, rather small house. And for an hour and a half, we prayed. We didn't chat. We didn't, you know, it wasn't kind of a social hour. It was really from 7:30 to about 9. There was this daily prayer. And so I got to know Henri listening to his sermons and just praying with him, praying in his presence. At the end of the year, he was going to L'Arche in France, and he didn't know whether he would come back to Harvard or not. He had not made the commitment, the decision to leave academia and to live in Daybreak, which he did a year later. And he asked me if I would live in that house and keep that prayer going. Unfortunately, after I had not applied for dorm rooms for the next year, Harvard took that house away from Henri. And he quickly had to decide what to do with his furniture. I actually was able to find an apartment, and Henri let me use his furniture for a couple of years. And we would continue to meet. I met him in France. I went and stayed with him there. Then our encounters continued when he moved to Toronto, you know, in 85, 86, 87. In the late 80s, I started spending a lot of time in communist countries. In 89, it was in Poland. In 88, it was actually in Soviet Ukraine. And I would share those experiences with Henri. In 1990, I lived in Washington, and I remember I had a fellowship at Dumbarton Oaks, and Henri sent me some flowers because I was going through a very difficult time at that point personally. So he was very sensitive, I think, to everybody. You know, at the end of his life, he was receiving over 100 invitations a week, 100 invitations, speaking invitations a week. He had 2 secretaries working on his correspondence. And somehow, Henri had been always interested in the Christian East, whether it was in the early Christian centuries, the Desert Fathers, iconography. He wrote the book Praying with Icons. He had a vast cultural kind of perspective. And since Xenia went there in early 92, and I moved in the summer of 92. The following year, Henri decided to come in and visit with us. And the whole experience is recorded in these diaries. So I encourage people to pick up the book that is published by Orbis. In 1996, a month before his death, we met in Peapack, New Jersey. He actually recorded it in his book, A Sabbatical Journey. And Henri decided to come to Ukraine again for at least another half year to teach and to continue writing about Ukraine. But unfortunately, the Lord took him. Well, I say, unfortunately, God's plans are plans for our happiness. And I trust that after a lifetime of prayer and spiritual pilgrimage, Henri, went home. But he accompanied the whole world that he knew in Ukraine, both the L'Arche Faith and Light world, which Xenia was the leader of, and our fledgling university. And those worlds actually met because from the very beginning, we decided, and this was, through kind of, at least for me, it was through Henri's influence, we decided to come up with, we came up with a rather counterintuitive way of addressing one of the major problems of post-Soviet Ukraine. And in fact, what 2 billion people bear, people who live between Estonia and Albania and China and Vietnam, 2 billion people lived under communism or continue to live under totalitarian communist regimes. When the system kills systematically, people develop a reflex of protection, a mask, a facade, a wall. Trust drops because the other is dangerous. And so for family life, for business, for social life, politics, for all human interaction, trust is so fundamental. And of course, it's very fundamental for our life with God. And the question is how to build trust in societies that are post-genocidal, that have deep wounds, where the fear and the protective mechanisms have entered the DNA. And by revealing for me the gift of our friends with disabilities, Henri helped us make the decision to put our friends with mental disabilities in the center of a very ambitious academic intellectual project. Not because they need us, that they need a social handout from us, but we need them as tutors of human relations, because they don't care. They don't care what degree you have, how much money you have, what power or position you have. They ask one basic question: can you love me? And we wanted to put that question at the heart of the pedagogical process of this university. We wanted this university to teach people to love, not only form the brain, the intellect, but to have an integrated approach to the human experience. And that it remains with the university. It became, I think, the first university that had people with mental disabilities living in the university, working in the cafeteria, in certain offices. There's a whole center called the Emmaus Center, which Xenia founded for us in the university, which fosters this spirituality and also assists in the administration of different projects, helping families with children, members that have mental disabilities. So this legacy is really implanted, and it really characterizes the university.
I find that so inspiring, and I'm delighted to know that in a way Henri had a little something to do with that. I think he would be thrilled too. I want to say, I think the book is an amazing gift to all of us who have loved Henri over the years. I personally have so enjoyed his journals, and there's something so raw and honest when Henri writes about the journey, about his own feelings and about what he's seeing, and there's a perceptiveness in it. And I really want to recommend to people that they get this book. It's really a treasure. This is Henri Nouwen, something that was in a way hidden away, and it's come to life for all of us, but it's come at a moment that it brings an amazing perspective on Ukraine. And I love your introduction. People will learn so much. Just before we finish, I'd love to hear from you a little bit. Henri made promises that he would come back. Who did come back, and who kept his promises?
Well, it was LAURENT, his brother. I remember visiting Henri and his family in the Netherlands, and during different conversations, with a certain regret, he would say, well, my siblings are not too interested in what I write, and my life, my preaching is something that they don't connect with. And then after Henri's death, Laurent actually read the manuscript of these Ukrainian diaries, and he was moved. He was moved by the fact that Henri made a promise to help one handicapped boy, a young man who needed a typewriter, and Henri promised to get him one. He couldn't write with his hand, but he wasn't actually fully kind of incapacitated. He could type with one finger, and he wanted to get a typewriter. There weren't many computers at all in Ukraine at that point in the early 90s. And so Laurent decided to go and fulfill Henri's promise. Well, that was the beginning of more than 20 years, actually 25 years of Laurent's traveling to Ukraine. He brought more than 100 tractor trailer loads of humanitarian gifts, computers for village schools, special medical equipment for hospitals, especially for a psychiatric hospital in Lviv, which he took under his care. All kinds of different things that were in short supply in post-Soviet Ukraine. This is quite amazing, because he would load, just with a couple friends, he would load up a tractor trailer. You can imagine loading up your trunk. Now imagine a whole tractor trailer, that's probably 1,000 times as much. And to do it over 100 times in a 25-year period. And then getting behind the wheel and driving that truck from the Netherlands, it's more than a 20-hour trip, just the driving itself, to get across all the borders and to deliver, get the truck unloaded. It's an amazing kind of legacy. And Laurent is one of my heroes. Laurent, if you're listening, when I grow up, I want to be like you. We've become good friends. I visit Laurent when I can in the Netherlands. Just in January, we rendezvoused in Paris, where I used to serve as bishop. Henri left a little impetus for many, many people, for me, for Zanya, but also for his brother Laurent. It has brought great fruit, and it has changed the lives of hundreds, if not thousands, of people.
Well, thank you so much for just helping us launch this book. We are also aware of the critical needs right now in Ukraine, and we'll make sure that at the close of this program, you'll be able to find links in our show notes for how you can be a help, because we want to be a help, just like Henri wanted to be a help, and Laurent so obviously has been a help over the last 25 years. And I want to encourage all of you to get this book. It's really precious. It's special. It will inspire you, and it will also tell you a story that began in Henri's life, in the lives of our sweet guests here, and it will inspire you. It will inspire you. Don't miss it. Thanks so much. Thank you so much, Boris, for being with me today. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Karen. It's like something from a time capsule. We often reread Henri. This is an opportunity to read something that nobody has ever read.
That's right. That's right. And it's well written. And it's got richness in it. It's got you, it's got Laurent. It gives a picture of what has been happening in the Ukraine over the last 30 years. It is a really precious book. So I'm very grateful you join us to help me share this with all the Henri fans and all the people that love to read Henri Nouwen. They're in for a treat reading this book.
Have a blessed Easter.
Oh, and you too. God bless you. Have a wonderful Easter. Blessings. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
When Henri Nouwen left Ukraine, he promised himself that he would return. In fact, he even wrote about it in Sabbatical Journey. He said he was planning to go back to Ukraine and maybe spend a half year there. Well, that was not to be. Henri died before he had that opportunity. But his younger brother, Laurent, read about this commitment, read about the needs that Henri had identified there, and he decided, well, perhaps I can help. That was the start of a very important commitment. Laurent has returned to Ukraine literally more than 100 times. He's one of my heroes, by the way. Laurent Nouwen has been making that journey from the Netherlands to Ukraine over and over and over again. He has a heart and a passion for Ukraine. Laurent, how are you doing, my friend?
I'm okay.
Are you? You look great. You look terrific. I truly enjoyed the book. Truly enjoyed it. And I just thought it would be lovely to hear in your own words just a little bit about just what it was about and how it came about. I thought it was so interesting. I mean, clearly, Henri wrote these journals in 93 and 94, and suddenly we have a book in 2023. Tell us the history. How did this happen?
When Henri in 1993 presented his manuscript to publishers in Northern America, at that time there was not so much interest in it. Maybe the question was, where the heck is Ukraine in those days? Well, what happened actually is when I met a friend of Henri in Paris, Maria Malenchuk, about 3 years ago. She is Ukrainian, but living in Paris, and a good friend of BORYS GUDZIAK. She asked me whether I knew where those manuscripts were, because she remembered that Henri had written about Ukraine. And I told her, well, you can find them in the Henri Nouwen archives or at my house. And she said, maybe we should considering publishing it, those two journals. And so I decided to publish it in Ukrainian language and for Ukrainians, because my activities in Ukraine were in 2021 were going to be finished due to my personal condition. And I wanted to offer that book to the many friends I had in Ukraine, many friends who had known Henri 30 years ago. So we got this small book published in the Ukrainian language, as you can see. I could give it away, but I was supported in that idea by BORYS GUDZIAK, who said, well, that's a good idea. I will take 750 copies as well for my own circle, so to say. So that is the reason the book came, first of all, with gratitude, by the way, to Henri Nouwen Legacy Trust, who didn't ask for royalties for this book, for Ukrainian publication. And so we could do it. And I got some funding together, and that was the start of it. And that was the Ukrainian edition, what was the first edition of the book.
And there's this wonderful picture, and it's before the war breaks out. It's in September of 2021, of the book being given to Vladimir Zelensky. I thought that was fantastic. How did that come about?
Well, that you have to ask BORYS. BORYS GUDZIAK, an old friend of Henri and a good friend of Henri today, or in his time, but also a very good friend of mine. Well, he knows famous people.
Well, the timing of this book has been amazing. In a sense, I think you were led to go ahead because none of us were anticipating really what happened last February when war broke out, when Russia invaded Ukraine. And I just, It's so very moving because as I read what Henri wrote about Ukraine in 1993 and 1994, it's quite prophetic.
It is. Well, anyway, what is prophetic about Ukraine is that it is a population, a country, which has suffered through history tremendously and is suffering again. What I appreciate in the book, not only in the book, but what at least makes me thinking about it, and Henri writes about it, when we speak about poor people, we not only speak about individuals, but we also speak about poor populations who have been crucified through history, who has been smashed by powers around them, and specifically minority people or small populations. And if we realize that, except from shorter times, Ukrainian people have always been under the power of third parties through their history and have only had a very few moments of independence. And the glory was there in 1991 when they got their independence. And now we see the crucified again, suffering beyond imagination today in our lifetime.
You know, Laurent, I was moved because in a sense, Henri grasped that it might be very, very, very difficult. But one of the things I just love, you picked up this mantle of Henri's. He'd made some commitments to come back and to help Ukraine. He was very deeply connected to the people and the country. But when he died, someone needed to pick up the responsibility, and you did that. Tell us a little bit about what's been going on from the Henri Nouwen Foundation out of the Netherlands. Tell us a bit about what you've been doing over these last almost 30 years. Tell us about that.
Let's start by the end. I did a lot, but I did too less. And I have tried to support. After Henri's death, I came to meet Zenia Kuspeta from Large Daybreak in Toronto, and I came to meet BORYS GUDZIAK. Zenia Kuspeta was a very good friend of Henri, invited Henri to come to Ukraine in 1992 already. She started to invitation. And Zenia, someone you cannot say no to, no way. And then there was, on the other hand, there was BORYS, and BORYS is as well a very charismatic person, an old student of Henri at Harvard University, and they have always been very good in contact. And also BORYS asked Henri to come to Ukraine. Both Zenia and BORYS left their quote-unquote comfort zone, living in Canada or living in the United States, and went back in 1992 to Ukraine to rebuild the country of their parents, the country of their ancestors. So Henri took that invitation. Now, okay, when Henri unfortunately died already early in 1996, I came to meet both BORYS and Zenia, and they both were asking, please, can you come to see what our country and to see what Henri did. I do not know whether or not they expected me to be a kind of secondary Henri with this beautiful wordings and beautiful, sermons. But anyway, it turned out that they could need some help. And I was hesitant because I was just a simple lawyer and with two left hands. So what can I do? And then I read in Henri's journals somewhere a sentence saying, I met a man who had cerebral palsy, and he's a very good poet. But he has to have somebody else to write down his poems. So that was what Henri said. I'm going to bring him a typewriter so he can type his own poets. Well, Henri never came to it. And I thought, wait, maybe, and Henri said, but I'm sure it will happen one day. So when I read that, I found it a little message of Henri to say, well, your little brother, you better go there with a typewriter. And so I did, and so it started. But they needed more than one typewriter. And so over the years, with many friends here in Holland, we tried to support initiatives in Ukraine financially and materially. And that can be, for orphans, we did a lot in the Western area, for orphans, for psychiatric patients, for broken families, you name it, and we did it.
Oh my. You brought 120, as I hear, 120 truckloads of materials over the last 25 years, back and forth to the Ukraine.
Yeah, at least, yeah. But that is, it looks, the funny thing is that even a clumsy man as I am, with two left hands, it turned out that I'm able to drive a truck. I'm able to get goods together, and I'm able to do it. But don't look at it as a good thing of my side. I got a lot of friendship back. I got a lot of meaning in relationships. I got a lot of pleasure. We had a lot of joy. And, maybe much more than I would ever have at a law firm.
Oh, that's lovely. You know what I love? You write the afterword in this book. It's coming out now in April. And you write kind of, in a sense, the closing chapter on it. And you write it as a letter to Henri, which I thought was such a beautiful idea. It really moved me. And in a sense, the other thing that I think you grasped uniquely, Laurent, was why the experience in Henri's life of Adam was kind of vital to him turning around from leaving Harvard and finding a kind of downward mobility that became empowering. Tell us a little bit, first of all, I love the fact you wrote it as a letter to Henri, but tell me what you were seeing happen in your brother at this time.
Well, I'm always a little bit hesitant to be too opinionated and to be sure about how things happen and what all the opinions are. But anyway, let's start with Adam and with me and Ukraine. Adam is a person, but Adam is as well for me a metaphor of Ukraine. Handicapped, silenced, poor on the one hand, but on the other hand, Ukraine, like Adam, is a giving personality. There is a mutuality there. It makes my existence relevant. Adam makes Henri's existence, his life, relevant. And that is what I did experience, if you want to make it a kind of a metaphor. That is definitely sure what I did experience with Ukraine. Maybe it could have been another place. And I often have said to Henri, why do you go to Ukraine and not to a better, warmer place in South Africa? I mean, I'm when I write a letter to Henri, I write a letter every day, so to say, in my mind. I'm in discussion with him, what the heck I'm doing here, and why I'm still waiting for 48 hours at the border. Why don't you do it yourself? But it's just fun to have such a brother.
Well, I think he would say the same of you. I think he'd say the same of you. You have you've done something that Henri may have envisioned was possible, and maybe only had a small idea, like he'd bring a typewriter and maybe a wheelchair for the poet. But you have brought resources and you've opened your heart to Ukraine. And today, I know that you're very passionate and active in whatever can be done to help at this point.
Helping is a mutual relationship.
Yes.
Helping is not doing good, but receiving good. And that is my experience. Caring in generally, take care of other persons, is the basic human condition. The basic, the only thing what gives sense to life, caring for others. But it is not so that I did care so much for Ukrainians, but Ukrainians did care for me just equally. And it was an extreme experience of mutuality, a mutuality of friendship, a mutuality. And we did meet just in the middle of suffering, where suffering is the place where I believe people can meet and people can be, yeah, help each other, care for each other. And people who are not able, because they are not maybe in a position to take care of others, actually feel themselves quite often without any meaning. And people who are given the opportunity to care for others feel themselves of relevancy. And, you know, so all this sounds all very philosophical, but to me, Henry left me a great legacy with Ukraine and the opportunity to meet his friends, Zhenya Kushpeta, Borys GUDZIAK, and hundreds of others. So it made sense to me.
I love that. It's interesting for me going back and reading what this is basically two journals, and the core of the book is a journal that Henry wrote when he first went to Ukraine in 1993, and then he wrote the second journal in 1994. And
Yes.
I've realized over the years, I have absolutely loved Henry's journals because at times they were just so natural. They're kind of just, how is he perceiving life? You don't feel like he's writing them for a reader. He's writing them for himself. He's capturing what's happening in his heart and his mind and his experience. And I've always found his journals disarmingly honest. And I know people are going to enjoy the Ukraine Diary. It's a wonderful book, but there is this terrific foreword by Archbishop Borys GUDZIAK, and he gives a great sense of, I'm grateful for the history he gives. I'm grateful for the way you kind of bookend this whole thing by explaining in a sense how you have received so much from it. And then of course there's our wonderful Robert ELLSBERG, who was the publisher, who turned down two things from Henry, which he's gone back to publish now because they have meaning now. And this very much, the timing of this book is just so special. I hope that every fan of Henry reads this book, because I think they will just, they'll feel in a sense I would say they'll feel almost the prophetic edge of where Henry came. He came to where Ukraine was at the bottom. And in the brokenness, he came and he said, we need to be here for these people right now. And he would be so phenomenally proud, as all of us are, because what we see in the people of Ukraine is we just see an amazing resilience, an amazing courage and moral leadership that just leads the world right now. So we're so very grateful for what we're seeing.
Correct.
Thank you so much, Laurent. I'm
Thank
so
you,
glad to have
Pascal.
time with you, and wish you well. Let's keep in touch, okay? Yes,
Okay,
bless
thank
you,
you.
my friend. You're beloved.
Okay, thank you.
And thank you for making this book happen. You
No.
really did have something to do with making it happen. And I'm so excited about what it's going to mean for others. They're going to enjoy reading what's in here. Thank you so
I
much.
hope so. Thank you, Karen. Thank
Take
you.
care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Be well.
We will.
Laurent Nouwen was responsible for getting the journals published in Ukrainian. Robert ELLSBERG, editor-in-chief of Orbis Books, is now bringing the Ukraine Diaries out in English. I'll let Robert tell you the story of how this finally happened.
Well, this goes back quite a long way. I'd known Henry for many years, and as publisher at Orbis Books, I had published several books by him, in 1993, he approached me and said, I've written a diary about a trip I made to Ukraine, and I wonder if you think it would be a book. So he told me another publisher was interested, but he would give it to Orbis if we were interested. So I read the book, and it posed a challenge for me, because I knew that Henri was very sensitive, and I was fearful of disappointing him. But when I read this account of an 11-day trip to Ukraine, it was hard for me to see how this represented a book. It was very short. It wasn't even clear exactly why this was so important to Henri at the time. And Ukraine certainly wasn't a topic that was of wide interest or attention at the time. So I carefully crafted a letter to him saying that I thought it was fascinating, but that I thought he should publish it as a series of articles. And he took that very well. And in fact, he did publish a serial in a journal called the New Oxford Review at the time. Now, that's the last I heard of it for many years go by. Henri died several years after that. I published other books with him right up until the end. But it was only when the invasion of Ukraine occurred last year in February that I thought again about those articles, and I wondered if they were online and if I could look at them again, see how they stood up. And to my surprise, I discovered that this little book of Ukraine diaries had been published in Ukrainian just a few months before. And there was a picture of Archbishop BORYS GUDZIAK, whom I knew from back at Harvard times when he was a friend of Henri's, and he was the one who had invited Henri to go to Ukraine. He's now an archbishop. And there was a picture of him presenting this book to President Zelensky. Well, soon after that, I had an opportunity to meet Archbishop BORYS, and we talked about the idea of publishing an English edition of this book. I didn't realize that there was a second diary. Henri had gone back the next year in 1994, and I certainly had no idea of what the significance of Ukraine was for Henri, and the fact that even right up till the end of his life, he was contemplating going to spend a whole semester in Ukraine. So this was had planted very deep seeds in Henri. And it was only then when I read the whole thing that I had this amazing sense that this book that seemed, well, it was just hard to see who would read it back then, actually not only had a very topical significance now in light of what Ukraine is going through, but that it biographically revealed something deep about what Henri was experiencing and why this experience in Ukraine was so important to him, and how in a very prophetic kind of way, he had recognized in Ukraine the struggle for a certain kind of moral and spiritual values in the early post-independence period after Ukraine became independent from the Soviet Union. And he was kind of rooting for Ukraine, whom he saw as a kind of the handicapped foster child of Europe at the time. And the kind of, the dimensions in which he saw the situation spoke so much to what we're witnessing today, and the kind of moral and spiritual values that the Ukrainian people have mobilized in responding to this aggression and attack on their freedom. And then, of course, Archbishop BORYS offered to write an introduction, which was extraordinary. And Henri's brother, Laurent, told a story that was unfamiliar to me about how this very diary had inspired him after Henri's death to undertake this long, decades-long mission of solidarity and support to the people of Ukraine.
I'm so glad that Robert Ellsberg, friend, editor, and publisher of so many of Nouwen's books, knew when to say no to a book and then knew when to say yes. And he said yes to Ukraine Diary. This book is available now, and Orbis is offering a special 30% discount to those who go to our show notes. Thank you for being part of this book launch. The royalties that we might receive from this are all going to Laurent's work to help with Ukraine. It's a commitment that I know Henri Nouwen would have made wholeheartedly because he loved Ukraine and he loved his people. I hope that you'll enjoy the book and that you there will discover this incredible prophetic voice that speaks from the past into our present about Ukraine and its needs and God's love for it.